Okay, I want to give you a couple more hints of how to do these Lewis structures. So when you're counting the valence electrons, if the formula has a -1 charge, you're going to add 1 extra electron. If it has a -2 charge, you're going to add 2 electrons. Now, if the formula has a +1 charge, we are going to subtract 1 electron from our valence count. Okay, so if our formula has a -1 charge, we're adding an extra electron. If it has a -2 charge, we're going to add 2 electrons. If the formula has a +1 charge, we're going to subtract an electrons. Remember, electrons are negative, so it always seems a little backwards. I want to give you a few more hints. One is that hydrogen can only have 1 bond and 2 electrons. Okay, but there's some other things that can only have 1 bond. Fluorine, chlorine, bromine, and iodide only make 1 bond. Now they can have extra electrons around them because they each need 8, but they can only make 1 bond. And remember that your goal is, this is a puzzle, and you're to take the electrons you have and make each atom happy. So that's 8 electrons for all but hydrogen. And remember, hydrogen can only have 2. So that's how you make everybody happy. And now I want to talk some about the other columns. So column C you don't have to worry about. That's if you're in class and want to show me your models. I'm actually going to take pictures of the models and put them on this. Column D, molecular geometry, you find by reading the lab. And you want to go to part D that talks about molecular geometry. And your choices are going to be tetrahedral, trigonal pyramidal, trigonal planar, bent, or linear. And all those are described for you in part D, the molecular geometry, and it goes on to the next page. So if you can't find it, remember to look on the next page. Then the next thing you're going to look at is the bond angles around the central atom. And for that, you're going to look under E, the section E, bond angles, and it's going to give you descriptions about the bond angles. Again, it goes on to the next page, so you might not get the correct one until you look at the next page. And then I want to talk to you about bond polarity. So this is a table of electronegativity values. And electronegativity is, you can think of it as the strength, electronegativity. How strong the atom pulls on electrons. So let me take a couple atoms and show you what I mean by that. So if we look at oxygen, oxygen has an electronegativity of 3.5. But if we look at carbon, carbon has an electronegativity of 2.5. That means if there's a carbon bonded to an oxygen, the carbon will be partially positive and the oxygen will be partially negative. So we put a positive sign on one end of the bond for the smaller number. And we put an arrow on the negative side of the bond for the larger number. And if all your bonds are carbon and oxygen, you don't only need to put that once. If you have a carbon to a chlorine, then you would also add that carbon and chlorine and do that one. And carbon is 2.5 and chlorine is 3.0. So you're going to do this under column F for each bond that's in your Lewis structure. But if it's the same bond over and over again, you only have to put it once. The other thing is if you have two oxygen atoms bonded, you just put a straight line between them because they pull on the electrons equally hard. So I think that should be all I have to tell you. And what follows will be pictures of the different models that can be made. And you need to look at the models because they will help you figure out the geometry and the bond angles. So I hope you have lots of fun doing this lab. And that's the end for me.